Kia and welcome to Context with me, Corin, Dann.
And with me, Guyon Espiner.
Now, we are the backstory to the front page story.
That's right. Context takes an issue which is making headlines today and traces its long shadow back into the past to see and figure out how it is we got to where we are today.
But there is a catch, as you good listeners know. Only one of us knows the topic we're going to be talking about.
That's right. So I've walked into the studio today with no idea at all what Corin is going to throw at me, but he's going to tell me about now.
Well, I am, and sometimes during the research for this topic, I wondered whether I knew what I was talking about either. We are going to look at New Zealand's constitution, or lack of constitution, or written constitution, or unwritten constitution. What exactly is it? Because, as listeners and viewers may well be familiar with, Andrew, the former prince, has got himself arrested recently, has been embroiled in huge scandal because of his links to Jeffrey Epstein. And there has been this movement brewing in the UK now to remove him from the succession from the throne. Now, he would be seventh from the throne. Now, I know because you've done some stories on this on Midday. Of course, it emerged, hang on a second here. Apparently, he's still seventh in line to be potentially the King of New Zealand.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can that be?
I know. I don't think there would be a lot of appetite, would there, for him to be our head of state. But, there would have to be a lot of pretty bad luck and tragedy to befall the other members of the royal family. But it is true. He's in the line of succession.
Isn't that incredible? Let's have a listen to just how it all sort of played out.
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor arrested after new revelations in the Epstein files in an extraordinary development without precedent in modern history. British police took the former prince into custody on Thursday morning on suspicion of misconduct in public office, having said earlier this month that they were assessing claims that Andrew had shared sensitive information with the late Jeffrey Epstein while serving as the UK's trade envoy.
Now, the interesting thing is here, so if they were to pass some legislation in the UK, they couldn't actually do it unless the likes of New Zealand and 14 other so-called realm nations that share the Crown of England or the Crown of British royalty as the head of state, which just seems extraordinary. So that prompted the question for this context, which is why? Why are we still in this situation as an independent country? So that prompts the question to you, Guyon, which to have a go at, because I've seen a few definitions of this, and it's not necessarily an easy one. If you had to explain to an alien what exactly New Zealand's constitutional status is, what would you say?
Well, we are a parliamentary democracy. We are obviously a Commonwealth country with the Queen as head of state, but it's a difficult position to explain to people, isn't it? Because really we have a Governor-General who's the representative of the King now, of King Charles. But those powers are what they call reserve powers, and we'll probably get into some of that.
Yep.
And, I don't know how many people know this, but effectively, the Governor-General has to sign off on every piece of legislation and give it so-called royal assent. So the parliamentarians make their decisions on behalf of us in the Parliament, but the representative of the King actually has to sign that off. And you do get into some pretty interesting situations. And under MMP, this has crept up every now and again about what the Governor-General might or mightn't do. And I don't know whether we're going to go there.
We're going to go there.
That's a bit of a ramble to an alien. But, it would be a little bit difficult to explain. I've tried to do it with my daughter sometimes, and that's a good test.
Well, I think this is really interesting because, as you sort of unpeel the onion here, we are a constitutional monarchy is how I've seen it described. Not always. You can ask ChatGPT, you can go to the history books, and you've got to take your hat off to the Moana Jacksons and the Andrew Geddys and the May Chens, the constitutional lawyers out there, because there's only about 5 people who really understand this stuff. But we are a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy under an unwritten constitution. That's one explanation I've seen. Another says New Zealand is an independent parliamentary democracy under a constitutional monarchy where legal authority flows from the Crown, but political power is exercised by elected representatives. And I think I like that one best. But there's a lot in there, isn't there? It is a slightly strange situation. And I think the key thing for listeners and viewers with this episode is to think about how we've evolved. We didn't have a big bang revolution where we suddenly became independent. There wasn't some sort of American, the War of Independence or something. We've got this slow evolution from basically being a colony through to a dominion. Then there's sort of some slight tweaks along the way, and slowly we've sort of shed bits of the British system and become an independent country. But we have to start, I guess, in 1840 with the treaty, which in itself is an entire context episode, and not just the treaty but the constitutional debate around the treaty. And I'm going to have to park that because that is beyond my pay grade, other than to say, obviously people will be familiar that the treaty is an agreement between Māori and the Crown. That was the Crown, the British Crown then in 1840. Now the Crown is actually an entity of New Zealand. We just share the King Charles as the Crown. The Crown is actually the New Zealand state, if you like. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But I guess the key point would be, I'd be interested to know what you think about this. If you were to click our fingers and say, we'll just become a republic, there is a big issue around the treaty, because what then happens to the responsibilities, the treaty breaches, all of the things that the treaty guaranteed Māori haven't gone away and are not going to go away if you suddenly make yourself a republic.
No, that's right. And you've hit on one of the in my view, the key issue with becoming a republic, because it sounds good, doesn't it? And especially when you start by saying, you might end up with, the royal, formerly known as prince, as your head of state, which no one kind of wants. And it also does sound a bit ridiculous. But then you have this, as you say, this real issue that how do you relitigate that? That would be an enormous exercise for New Zealand.
No,
I'm not sure anyone has the appetite to do.
No, and I think it would be a 10-year exercise. You would have to set up some sort of. And I think Bill English did sort of have a little go at a constitutional panel.
He did, didn't he?
It was 2011. Didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Didn't go anywhere.
No.
I just quickly checked that. Because it is very complicated, and there are responsibilities under the treaty for Māori, partnership, participation, all those things, and protection, which would have to be addressed. So I just want to push that to one side. I will talk a little bit more about some of the ways in which Māori certainly have petitioned the Crown over the years, and some of the successes and failures they've had to get the Crown to help them. But I want to push on because we'll just get through a few little key points. 1852, the New Zealand Constitution Act, that basically was the piece of legislation that allows the colony of New Zealand just to set up government and regional governments. So that was the mechanism that did that. 1907, we stopped being a colony and became a dominion. That's when we had that choice of whether we wanted to potentially join with Australia or not. We did not. But I think what is clear from looking at from looking into this is that. And I wanted to, the Pākehā New Zealanders, the settlers who were here, they very much wanted to stay part of Britain and were very connected, almost more so than Australia, where there was the element of the convicts. There were parts of Australia that were settled in different ways, but it was seen as we were the most British of the colonies, and that was reflected in our response through various wars and things. And I wonder if I'll get to a bit of audio here that it sort of helps explain that, and you can perhaps give us some thoughts on it. Let's play this one.
We range ourselves without fear beside Britain. Where she goes, we go. Where she stands, we stand. We are only a small and young nation, but we are one and all a band of brothers, and we march forward with a union of hearts and wills to a common destiny.
Yes, that's Michael Joseph Savage in 1939, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, just on the outbreak of World War II. He died a few months after that, I think, or shortly after that.
That's right. Peter Fraser took over, and we actually declared war on our own.
we did. I think we were pretty
first
early.
off the bat.
Yeah,
just
after
frame.
the Westport News had warned Hitler in several strongly worded editorials.
Really?
And he didn't take any notice of that. But then the Kiwis were coming.
It's an interesting line that stuck with me, and it's that where she goes, we go. And so you can sense the mentality of certainly, Pākehā New Zealand at that time was we're very much British, and that we're going with them, and that certainly was the case.
Well, we're both from Christchurch, Corin, which was considered more British than Britain, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean the mother country was another term that props up quite a bit, doesn't
Britain's
it? And I
farm,
think,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes this really interesting, because actually the other countries within the so-called empire, as it was called then, a lot of the other colonies, they actually had earned the rights with the Balfour Declaration in 1926. They got their equal status with Britain. At that time, Gordon Coates, the New Zealand Prime Minister, called that poisonous and propaganda. 1931, it led to the UK passing the Westminster Act, which actually said that the Dominions, like New Zealand, were autonomous communities equal in status to the United Kingdom. It basically was saying you are independent countries, but New Zealand, would you believe, did not pass that for like another 16 years. We had to pass it in our parliament. And not only that, we stipulated to them we wouldn't agree to it unless they put on a clause saying New Zealand had to pass it through its parliament. So there was a real reluctance, it seems, to go down that path, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I mean, from my recollection of history, we were a dominion, were we, right through into the 1930s, is that right?
Well, no. Yes, to 1947. Really,
was it?
I mean, we could have probably altered that, but in 1947 we finally approved the Westminster Act, and I wonder if you've got any clue as to why we might have actually ended up passing the legislation in the end.
In 1947.
Yeah. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, no,
I'll give you a clue.
Yep.
It's sort of to do with if you go to the Parliament, there's Parliament's debating chamber, and then there's another big room.
Oh yeah,
that
true.
just sits
Okay, yeah, right. So we got rid of our upper house.
Yes.
Yeah, but I thought that was in the 50s that we
Yes,
did
it
away
was.
with that. Yeah, okay.
It was, but apparently there was such a opposition sort of publicly to doing it, apparently. Fraser wanted to do it, and he passed the legislation, the Westminster Act, and it was national in 1951 that campaigned actually on the election to be elected, saying they would get rid of it. Apparently it had just turned into a rubber stamp exercise and wasn't of any great use. They were appointed people to a second chamber, like the Lords in the UK. If you go to Parliament now, you can see the building. They use it for functions.
Yeah, the old ledge chamber, they call it, don't they?
Yeah. And it was like we had the second house because they'd modelled the Westminster system. But actually, Harry Holland at the time, he set up what was called a suicide squad. He basically he was elected, and then he appointed a whole bunch of people to the second chamber to vote itself out of existence.
Right.
Which is pretty mad.
Didn't know that.
But here's another little bit of audio, just to re-emphasise the point about how New Zealanders saw things in 1950.
I greatly appreciate the kind and loyal message that I have received from all those assembled in Auckland for the British Empire Games. I hope that the Games will be in every way successful and serve to bring closer together the many units of the Commonwealth and Empire who will be represented at them.
So that was Bernard Freyberg, who was the Governor-General at the time, speaking on behalf of King George, at the Empire Games, as it was called, in Auckland in 1950, which was the precursor to the Commonwealth Games.
Wow.
Yes. So anyway, it was interesting, isn't it? 1950, we were the Empire. Right. So we had the Empire Games. That turns into the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, there's 15 realm nations within the Commonwealth. New Zealand's one of those that shares the British King. Of course, there's lots of other countries in the Commonwealth as well. You would have gone to some choggums, wouldn't you, in your day as political editor? They were sort of a gathering of Commonwealth countries, weren't they?
I think I might have delegated that one when I was political editor. The choggums. Yeah, it was always a choice between the choggum and the APEC, and I think I usually went to the APEC. But Don McKinnon rose to be the chief of that, didn't he?
He did, and it seems to have fallen by the wayside a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, you don't hear much of. Imagine if you stopped 10 people in a shopping mall and asked them what a choggum was, they'd probably think it was a chocolate bar or something.
I went to one in Sri Lanka. There was a lot of talk about elephants, but I don't seem to have them anymore. 1953, we tweaked, we did some changes around Royal Titles Act, so that, again, just sort of the definitions around that when we talk about the King of New Zealand, that just allowed that to drop the British bit of that. And then 1954, the Queen visited, one of the 10 times the Queen Elizabeth came to New Zealand, and she actually did, which is an interesting quirk of the system, the speech from the throne. Let's have a listen to this.
Prime Minister Mr. Sidney Holland hands Her Majesty the speech she will deliver from the throne to the Assembly. With great dignity and authority, the Queen declares Parliament open.
Honourable members of the House of Representatives, it is with a feeling of real satisfaction that I speak to you, the elected representatives of the people of New Zealand, as your Queen, and that I exercise my prerogative of opening the fourth session of this 30th Parliament.
That role is usually obviously done by the Governor-General now. Just explain to people the importance of that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, we still have the speech from the throne. You still hear at the beginning of a parliamentary term, don't you? The government rolls out its agenda. But, fascinating to hear the Queen speaking in those days. And that would have been a year after Hillary had climbed Everest. So huge amounts of sort of, nationalism there. And it would have been, huge uprisings of support for the Queen, I imagine, on that. And a huge amount of support for the royal family in New Zealand in those days, from what you read.
100%. Do you ever meet the Queen?
No. My father did. My father showed her around Princess Margaret Hospital.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I got to meet her as part of the press gallery in, I think it was 2002. I have to admit that I was pretty sceptical going in there, and I spoke to her for a couple of minutes.
Did you?
With a group of journalists, Barry Soper and myself and a couple of others. And
God, they didn't let Barry loose on her, did they?
No, He asked all sorts of questions. It was all Chatham House, so I'm not even sure I could talk about what was said now. I know she's obviously not alive, but they were the rules.
Wow.
Couldn't say a word. They very trusting of us.
Wow.
And there would be a lady in waiting always with her. And the rules we're at Parliament, Government House, and we're in the sort of ballroomy sort of area there. And the rules were you had to stay still. You weren't allowed to mingle. And this is sort of 30, 40 people. And you had to wait as the Queen slowly sort of moved around the room and would come to your little group and then do a little chitty chat. And she, you could tell that she'd done it her entire life, and so she was just so good at it.
Was she impressive? I mean, people say that she was very impressive.
I was impressed.
Yeah,
My wife laughs at me because I was sort of back then I was pretty sort of gung ho about why do we have this? Why have we got?
I've softened a bit. I've softened a bit over the years on that.
I came out of there starstruck.
Yeah,
she laughs at me because I've got a house with royal memorabilia all over it because she loves that stuff, and so
was that. So that was when Clark was PM, wasn't it? Did you say 2002?
Yes.
Yeah. Wasn't there some controversy about her wearing pants, and the media was really upset about that?
Oh, that does ring a bell. Of course, as you've alluded to, Guyon, it's the Governor-General who effectively represents the Queen when they're not here. as a representative. And for the most part of history, they represented, for a large part of it, it was the Queen, it was the royal, the monarchy, as well as the British government. That ended after 47, and it was just the representative of the Queen or the King. Let's have a listen to one of the more famous Governor-Generals being sworn in back in 1930.
I, Charles Baron Bledisloe,
I, Charles Baron Bledisloe,
do solemnly swear
swear
that I will duly execute the office of Governor-General
the office of Governor-General
and Commander-in-Chief
and Commander-in-Chief
in and over the Dominion of New Zealand
in and over the Dominion of New Zealand
and its dependencies,
and
that I will duly and impartially administer justice therein, so help me God.
I mean, the point I guess I'm trying to make here is he's British-born, British aristocracy effectively, had been an MP of some sort, and for a long time they were just obviously, they came through the ranks through the British. Even Freiberg, who was obviously in New Zealand, was a general of command of the New Zealand Army.
Yeah.
He was born in Britain, but he did spend time in New Zealand in his youth, and that's why he wanted to come back. But he was still British-born. I wonder, which leads me to the next question. This is a hard one too. Any ideas who the first New Zealand-born Governor-General was?
First New Zealand-born Governor-General.
I'll give you the date, 1967.
Was it too early for Hardy Boys? Might have been, eh?
Just, a little bit early for Hardy Boys. It was Sir Arthur Porritt.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go to just what the Governor-Generals do. I mean, you sort of alluded to a lot of it. A lot of it's pomp and ceremony, isn't it? But I think that where it starts to get a bit more nitty-gritty is around MMP.
Yes.
And can you remember, so put into context for people, 1996 rolls around, or any MMP election, what is the Governor-General looking for after an election?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, he or she is looking for someone to say, I can command a majority in the House. And you know, it'd be fascinating to be a fly on the wall in those situations. And I know there was a bit of trepidation in the lead up to MMP, which obviously largely, apart from 2020, where Jacinda Ardern won a majority, is going to rely on coalition government. So let's say there's 120 MPs, obviously need 61 to get over the line, and that might be 2 or 3 parties, or possibly more, depending on what the situation is. And the Governor-General is going to want to know from the prospective Prime Minister that they can have a majority support in the Parliament to form a government and to have confidence and supply being supply of money, and confidence being able to pass a confidence vote and maintain a government. So that's what they want to hear.
100% clear and public statements from political parties that they've got that support. And the reason, I suppose, that then comes to those issues of reserve powers, again, and this is where it starts to get a bit, they still have the power, technically is the word here, to appoint or dismiss a Prime Minister, refuse a request to dissolve Parliament, force the dissolution of Parliament, refuse a royal assent to a bill.
Yes.
Never been used in New Zealand, those reserve powers.
No,
but
Walt Whitman, though, Golf Whitman. Gough Whitlam was it? Yeah, 1973, I think. That became an issue in Australia, didn't it? I don't know, maybe you want to get in there, I don't know.
Yeah, let's go there. 75, let's have a listen.
Was it 75? Yeah.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General. The proclamation which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary was countersigned Malcolm Fraser. Who will undoubtedly go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
That's pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing.
So, So that's Whitlam on the steps of Parliament after the Governor-General dismissed the Parliament and basically put Malcolm Turnbull in and to enable him to call an election.
What was the key reason for that? I mean, I don't know a lot about this. I knew it happened. Got the date slightly wrong, but I knew it was in the 70s.
Yeah, no, you were onto it because it would have had shockwaves here in New Zealand, I imagine. It did. Basically, they had two houses in Australia, the House of Representatives and then the Senate. There was a deadlock situation where the Whitlam government, which was under huge pressure economically and had been plagued by some scandals and various difficult times, couldn't get a budget through the second house, through the Senate, and it was like this sort of stalemate situation. And Whitlam was basically arguing that they just had to hang on till the next election. Nothing much would happen. Where Fraser went to the Governor-General and said, you've got to dissolve, you've got to allow the dissolution of the double dissolution of Parliament and have another election. And the Governor-General agreed and allowed him to effectively become the Prime Minister in order to do that. And of course, the reserve powers, no one had ever really used them before in that way. And of course, you can imagine across in New Zealand, people must have thought, heck, and funnily enough, we did have a constitutional crisis of sorts in 1984. Let's just have a little listen to some of the audio and then we'll talk about what happened in 1984 after the election then.
We have now reached the point where there is a constitutional crisis. This Prime Minister, outgoing, beaten, has in the course of one television interview tried to do more damage to the New Zealand economy than any statement ever made. It is time for the National Party to take steps in the interests of this country's economic security to see that he does not exercise that power, because clearly now he has passed the capacity to exercise a judgment in the interests of New Zealand.
I am not going to devalue so long as I'm Minister of Finance. If Mr. Longi has got any sense at all, and up until this moment on this thing, he has not displayed it, he will come out with me and say, we will not devalue the New Zealand dollar. He only has to say that tonight, and I can assure you that everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, I mean, this was an extraordinary period. I don't know what you remember of that.
Yeah, well, only from what I've read, I would have been 14 at the time. But that's Muldoon, who is still technically the Prime Minister even after the June or July loss to David Longi's fourth Labour government, and he's refusing to devalue the currency, despite that being the intention of the incoming government. He's still technically Prime Minister, so he's refusing to do that. New Zealand's getting caned on the FX markets and losing would have been, I think, probably tens if not hundreds of millions in those days' money, which would have been a lot. And I think the Labour guys had gathered at the Māori Hotel, Mike Moore and Roger Douglas and David Longi. And in the end, as far as I can read it, Muldoon's guys convinced him that he had to do it, and he did eventually agree to it. But of course, you heard him say, I mean, he was finance minister as well as prime minister, so he had a lot of power. And yes, an extraordinary time.
Yeah, no, that's bang on. That's 100% right. It was Jim Macleay, basically. The national guys basically said they'd all resign told Muldoon if they'd all resign as ministers straight away if he didn't do it. And eventually, he came round. What was interesting,
just to explain to people, it's because he hadn't been sworn in, Longi, as Prime Minister. You need to be obviously sworn in. People will see it with American elections, right? You get elected in November, but you're not actually the president until, January, the whatever, of that next year. And in New Zealand, it's a very truncated period. It's days or weeks, but there's a sort of an interregnum time when you're not actually technically Prime Minister yet, and that's what left the window open for Muldoon. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely bang on. And what it led to was the 1986 Constitution Act, where we basically now have a caretaker provision. What the key point was, we didn't have that. So our Constitution Didn't have anything there. There wasn't actually any rules or sort of guidelines or conventions for what to do in that situation. That was a glaring omission. And so let's have a listen to this piece of audio. It was on the night or the lead up to the 1986 the election.
The rules then meant that Mr Longi couldn't be sworn in by the Governor-General straight away. The election writs had to be in, and that took some days. But now, if Mr Bolger wins tonight, he theoretically can take over tomorrow. But Mr Longi isn't willing to accept his direction.
Yeah, so, I mean, they had to... That 1986 piece of legislation is... some descriptions say it's basically we've got our full legal independence, because not only did it sort of spell out those caretaker provisions, it really overrode some of those other things, the Statute of Westminster and other things, and it spelled out how the system is, how we would expect it today. Where you've got your cabinet, you've got your parliament, you've got your courts, your three branches, and you've got your cabinet manual, which explains how the ministers are supposed to behave and what they're supposed to do and their responsibilities.
Yes.
And it also just reiterated this idea, which I've taken a little bit of time to get my head around, which is when we talk about the Crown, a Crown prosecutor, a Crown-owned entity like a TVNZ or something, or I think they were called Crocs back in the day, weren't they? We're not talking about the British Crown. We're talking about the Crown, which is really a separate legal entity that represents the state, which is made up of the Governor-General and the King, who we share, then the ministers, and then your government departments. So it sort of took me a while just to get my head around this, that it's actually a separate legal entity, the New Zealand Crown, even though we share, Charles. I mean, it's kind of a confusing system, don't you think?
It is, but and when you go, oh, that doesn't sound logical, let's unpack that and let's pull it apart, you do go, well, is it broken? And I've softened on this over the years. I mean, I used to think and be pretty gung-ho about the fact that, why have we got this head of state who's, so many thousand miles away? But it kind of works for us largely, doesn't it? So it's it is complex and does take some getting your head around, but it also has tended to work fairly smoothly most of the time. I'm sure we're going to have more of those constitutional crises. I mean, MMP does really provide that sort of potential, doesn't it? What say you had some maverick guy who was holding the balance of power and said, well, I'll support this team for half the term and that team for the next half, or something like that. You know, you can envisage scenarios. What would a Governor-General do? And there were warnings going in after 96 that there might have to be a greater role for the Governor-General. It hasn't come to that. But, you had Helen Clark.
They've got to be ready.
Yeah, they do.
They've got to be ready.
You had Helen Clark and then John Key to an extent running minority governments. I mean, and that was a little bit new for us. You had all sorts of weird constitutional things after the Shipley government fell apart in August of 98. You had independent ministers. I mean, I don't know whether you recall that, but you had guys like Tuariki Delamere and Jack Elder and others.
So they were ministers, but they weren't
ministers
in the government.
of the Crown, but they weren't in any political party. They were independents because they'd walked away from New Zealand First. And so that was pretty interesting. Then, after 2005, again involving Winston Peters, he claimed he was the foreign minister. You remember, because I think you did some stories.
Yes.
He said he was going to be on the back bench and he wasn't going to join any government. Then he went into Helen Clark's coalition with her and became the foreign minister. But they claimed, and I think wrongly, and most constitutional experts I think would agree with me, that he claimed that he wasn't part of the government.
Yeah, that's
he
right.
was a minister in the government.
Yeah.
Now, most constitutional experts would tell you, that you are in the government if you are a minister, because that's what separates the executive from the, from the backbench, etc. So you have had little wrinkles. None of this blew up because it wasn't big enough to constitute a problem. But we have had little challenges.
Well, I think that sums up really
well.
well. Really well, the thrust here is that this is an evolution.
Yes.
We don't have a written down constitution.
We don't have a written constitution, and a lot of people will hear this in America, and they'll know it. Oh, he pleaded the Fifth, they'll know about gun rights or freedom of speech, and it's laid in the Constitution, and the president can only have 2 terms, and he has to be 35 or over, or whatever it is. But we don't have that, and we are a bit of a rarity. So we've got this really nuanced, interesting system, and on top of that, we've grafted MMP onto that, which it is really interesting. But there will be, I reckon, there will be a time where it is thoroughly tested.
I think you're right. I mean, just to go through some of the things so we say unwritten constitution, but we have a Bill of Rights. Which spells out your freedom of speech and association and those sort of things. But that's just a step. We've got statutes, we've got laws, and we've got common law in the courts, and then it's those things that you were talking about, the conventions, like the caretaker rules, the cabinet manual, as a minister in and out. So we got inside or out, so you put all those things together.
That's right.
And I suppose you could write it down, but maybe it's better not written down.
Yeah, I mean, and the cabinet manual, which you've mentioned, is one of the documents that does, apparently, according to the constitutional experts I've read on this before, it's one of the documents that makes up our sort of unwritten constitution. And it's so that's an important part. I mean, in some ways, it just lays out what the expectation of ministers are, but it is an important piece of our constitutional makeup.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned earlier, obviously, about the treaty, which is, as I say, is another whole topic in itself in terms of the constitution. But it was interesting to see how Māori, right throughout after the treaty, did go to the British Crown numerous times seeking petitions, travelled there, and in many instances demanding that the Crown uphold its obligations and for assistance with, land grievances. I think there was one here in 1914 where we had King Tarata visit to King George the Fifth. This was the Māori king at the time. Travelled to London to petition King George V over land grievances. They were always generally granted an audience, but they were told that the British Crown could not intervene in the decisions of the New Zealand government, so that would have been pretty disappointing. And cracks did start to appear in that relationship. 1986, the Queen was visiting, and she was egged by some protesters. Let's have a listen to this.
3 eggs were thrown by 2 girls wearing stewards' white coats. They were quickly seized, but security had failed. At the state banquet in Wellington, the Queen was still preoccupied by the egg throwing.
Of course, New Zealand has also long been renowned for its dairy produce, though I should say that I myself prefer my New Zealand eggs for breakfast.
It's a pretty daring line.
It's a pretty good line. Wasn't there a guy? Was it Dann or someone?
Yes.
Okay. Now didn't he bear his buttocks to the? Was
he
that
mooned.
To the Queen? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. That wasn't on the same trip, was it?
No, I think that was 19. It might have been the same trip actually, 1986. Yeah. And then in 1990, you'll remember she visited Waitangi, and there was a T-shirt thrown at her as well. Yeah. So it's fair to say that Māori, and you could argue pretty strongly, had a lot of grievances they felt with the Crown, and they let the Queen know that when she came here.
Yeah, and didn't she deliver the apology either to Ngaitahu or to Waikato Tainui on the treaty settlement?
I think that's right, and there have been obviously a number of apologies from the Crown in most treaty settlements, in fact, usually include an apology of some sort, as well as the settlement, don't they?
They do. And just as a quick aside, I'd encourage anyone to read treaty settlements because they're a great way of getting they're often really well written in terms of the history of what happened to various iwi, and totally immaculately researched, those apologies. And you can read them. They're pretty easy to read. You'll find them online. But it's a great little sharp sort of history lesson when you think, oh, gee, okay, this was pretty full on. And so you get quite a good read when you read one of those.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, these things have taken years of research and evidence and arguments to stack up. Yeah. They're substantive documents, aren't they? Hey, that brings us to the other, the last sort of leg as our journey through the Constitution of New Zealand. Goodness, I don't know why I chose another tricky one, didn't I? Is the Privy Council.
Yes.
And of course, this was. Well, where do we start with the Privy Council? I mean, what's perhaps I'll throw the ball to you.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a group of appointed lords and judges and officials in England who sit basically provide advice to the Crown in England, who were our last courts of appeal. And you'll be familiar. There's been some famous cases that have gone to the Privy Council in New Zealand. Any that jump out at you?
Yes. I think wasn't there. I think there was New Zealand involvement in some sort of spy case or spy novel that someone wanted to publish that went all the way.
That does ring a bell. I didn't look at that one.
To the Privy Council. There might have been some others. What did you dig up?
Well, the Bain one. David Bain.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, David Bain.
Who also actually had a prerogative of mercy application. He took it. That's another thing the Governor-General can consider. Mercy can pardon someone, theoretically. She didn't at the time. The Governor-General at the time referred it back to the courts. But he went to the Privy Council and they explicitly stated, they didn't say he was innocent, but they required a retrial. There was also Erebus, Justice Mann's 1981 report.
The orchestrated litany of lies. That was the famous line from that one, wasn't it?
That was. He didn't win that, but he was praised by the Privy Council. The other one was Māori broadcasting rights, which is a very important one, and that established a lot of principles we consider today.
Yeah, that's right, and that's actually led to the establishment of Whakaata Māori TV.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, so that was a big
deal. And it really emphasised that point that there is a treaty obligation around the protection of the taonga of the language.
Yes,
and that's a theme that we could expand another time. But of course, we got to 2003, and the Labour government at the time decided they wanted to get rid of the Privy Council. Let's have a listen.
If New Zealand is to develop its own jurisprudence reflecting the needs of our own society, then we must throw off once and for all the fetters of our colonial past. It is time we took responsibility for our own legal destiny and celebrated the fact that we have a judiciary of the highest integrity and capability.
Yes, that's Margaret Wilson, isn't it? And she was Attorney General in the Clark government, and of course went on to be Speaker of the House.
That's right. And she drove that through. It was a very close vote. There were a lot of arguments against giving up on the Privy Council because people felt that it was good to have some distance, have a group of experts a long way away who weren't embroiled in the minutiae of New Zealand, who could make a judgment on things. So there was quite strong opposition to getting rid of that, and it only passed quite narrowly.
Did it? Yeah, and I do remember that at the time. But those concerns haven't really played out and panned out that much. You don't hear we have our own Supreme Court now. You don't hear a lot of strong criticism, do you? I don't think so. Wish we still had the Privy Council.
No, and people might be familiar in Wellington. There's the building over the road from Parliament with a funny sort of wire on the outside, which is a beautiful building inside too. The Supreme Court, which was set up, that is our final court of appeal, and that's our top judges effectively are on that. Interestingly enough, it was the Greens, the support of the Greens that got that through. Nandor Tanchos was their justice spokesman, and I remember him at the time being very strong on that, and he was pretty influential, I think, in probably getting that legislation through.
It wasn't what he was best known for, probably, was it?
No, he was a Rastafarian
skateboarding sort of,
and is now the mayor of is it Whakatane? Just finally, let's just ruminate a little bit about republicanism.
Yeah,
there's been a few politicians over the years that have sort of been keen. There's probably one that stands out. He actually passed recently. You might ring a bell.
Who was that? No,
Jim Bolger.
Well, of course, yeah, I guess so.
And that probably doesn't surprise people, given his Irish sort of heritage.
Yes, that's true, isn't it? I mean, the classic line, and I think even Luxon, it has used this, Chris Luxon, that Helen Clark used to use it, Jacinda Ardern, John Key probably too, although John Key was, he loved an audience with the Queen, didn't he?
He did.
Key loved that sort of stuff. But, they'd always say, it's inevitable to happen one day, but they didn't want to actually go anywhere near it themselves. But I remember being at TVNZ, we used to a poll on this every now and again, and there was, I don't know, it would be sort of 30-40% maybe who wanted to become a republic.
You're bang on.
Was
2024, the last poll I looked at was 55% of New Zealanders think a British monarch should remain. So there wasn't, there's
never been full support for it. I remember doing the polling and never seeing a majority in support for becoming a republic.
So let's wrap it up. What I would say is that we still come back to the situation with Andrew. It's a convoluted path, isn't it?
But it is. But it's quite possible and easy to solve that line of succession. It's a simple piece of legislation. We did it. I looked a little bit at this. We did it. I think in 2015 it passed because we made changes along with the other realm countries about the line of succession because back in the day males would leapfrog females, and there were other. There was something actually that you had to change about a Catholic being involved. I can't remember exactly the different metrics that you had to have. But my point is that quite easily we changed this, and so you could do it with Prince Andrew. You don't need to throw the whole constitutional system out to get the guy off the books in the unlikely event that the rest of the royals went down in a plane crash or something tragic. So no one really wants Andrew in the line there, but it isn't a big deal to actually get him out of that line, is it?
Yeah, no, that was a difficult navigation through that minefield of New Zealand's constitution or lack of constitution or unwritten constitution. I think we've established. That's context for this week. We'll catch you again.
I think we might get an email from a Jeffrey Palmer.
Probably. That's a tricky one, man, once you start unpeeling the onion. But I think we covered it.
That was good fun. I enjoyed it. Yeah.